evening. I am honored to be able to speak with you here tonight in this important session, focusing on reaffirming the truths we all believe. Now, I am a climate scientist, and you might wonder why I am leading off a session on this topic. It's because the reason I'm a climate scientist is because of my faith and the work I do and the work we are all called to do in community together reaffirms the truths we all believe. Let me explain. I was fortunate to grow up in a home where I was taught that the Bible is God's inspired written word and that science is God's expressed word. Think about it for a minute. If we believe the universe was created by God, as it says in the Gospel of John, chapter 1, that the Word was with God in the beginning, and through him all things were made, then what is studying this amazing universe we live in? What is science other than trying to understand the mind of God? Trying to understand the laws and rules of physics that he established that govern the universe and this world that all of us live in. The author of Hebrews defines faith as the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of what we do not see. But if I could go back 2,000 years, I would jog the elbow of the author of Hebrews and I would say, you forgot the second part. The second part of the verse is, what is science other than the substance of the here and now, the evidence of what we do see? Faith is not in competition with science. They're two complementary things. Not only that, but the psalmist writes, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the skies proclaim the work of his hands. And the more our ability to see with our eyes God's amazing handiwork, like this nebula, the greater our awe. We see a similar beauty when we turn our eyes towards our home planet. These images, next, are from NASA satellites, and they're using the Earth's surface to spell a word. Do you know what it is? H-O-M-E. It spells home. The more we learn about our planet, the more unique we realize it is, and the more we appreciate the care and attention and love that went into making it our perfect home. A home that we have a God-given responsibility to care for. Why do I say that? It's because that's what the Bible says. So in Genesis 1, we learn that humans were created in God's image for a reason, for a very specific purpose, to rada every living thing on the planet. And I want to highlight two concepts in this verse. First, the idea that every living thing includes plants and animals and us. Our sisters and our brothers, people who are sitting beside you right now, people who live with you at home, people on the other side of the world. We are all living things. And we humans are some of the neediest and most vulnerable of living things. Nature does not need us. We need it. That's how God created us. So take a breath. That breath is full of oxygen that keeps us alive. But did you know that half of that oxygen comes from tiny phytoplankton in the ocean? That's them up on the top. And then the rest of it comes from giant kelp in the sea and from trees. All the water we drink, all the food we eat, all the resources we use to make everything we have, it all comes from this planet. The planet can survive without us. We, on the other hand, we can't survive without a healthy, thriving planet. And when the planet is not healthy and thriving, when ecosystems are degraded, when nature is choked with pollution, who is most impacted? In addition to nature itself, it's those who lack sufficient food, clean water, a safe place to live, the very ones we Christians are told to love and care for. So to any who say that caring for the planet is somehow worshiping creation over the Creator, I say not so. Just open your Bible to the very first chapter and consider that we too are part of creation. Consider also how the Bible explicitly says that God values the most seemingly insignificant aspects of creation, the birds of the air, the lilies of the field, and has designed us to live in an ecosystem where everything is connected. And our lives are interdependent with nature in ways that we are only beginning to understand. Let me give you just one example. So across North America, there is a fungus known as white nose syndrome that is killing bats. Too bad for bats, you might think. But what does this have to do with us? Bats serve an essential function. They eat the pests that eat our crops. And as bat populations have fallen, farmers have started to use more and more pesticides that pollute our air and our water. And a new study just 2 weeks ago found that all the extra pollution from pesticides has led to over 1,000 infant deaths only in the area the researchers studied. Over 1,000 dead babies only in that area studied because of pollution caused by our response to a fungus that's killing bats. You see how everything we're starting to understand is connected. But the second point I want to make about this verse is the use of the word rada. Forgive my pronunciation, I am not a Hebrew scholar. The word was originally translated a long time ago as have dominion over, but more recently has been read as have responsibility over. But rather than argue over which word is best, let's simply look at another place in the Bible where the same word is used. So if we go to Psalm 72, it speaks of God's responsibility or dominion, and it's very clear what it looks like. To God, Rada means that he will deliver the needy who cry out, who will save the afflicted who have no help. That is what this word means. This concept was key to my own journey. Growing up, I understood, as many of us do, that pollution is bad. I'm from a big city, so I know what smog looks like. I also knew that as humans use up more and more of the Earth's resources, animal populations are falling. It's not only bats. Since I was born, 70% of the land-based animals, from giraffes to bees, have disappeared. 70% of the total number of animals on the earth have disappeared. And that is what we refer to as the biodiversity crisis. And I knew that there was an even bigger invisible problem that we can't see, but it affects us all the same. Climate is changing faster than any time in history. According to natural factors right now, the earth should be cooling very slowly. Instead, it is warming faster and faster, and we are the ones to blame. We know that 22% of these heat-trapping gases come from deforestation and industrial agriculture, which of course also affects pollution and biodiversity. We know that the rest comes from digging up and burning coal and gas and oil for industry, for transportation, and more. The more heat-trapping gases we produce, the more they're building up in the atmosphere where they're wrapping an extra blanket around the planet. And imagine if someone snuck into your room at night and put an extra blanket on you, you'd wake up sweating, saying, hey, I didn't need this extra blanket, I'm too warm. That's exactly what's happening to our planet. And the Earth is heating up year by year. Each bar here is a year, and you can see that over the last 120 years, we've gone from cool years to medium years to years that are so warm they had to add a new shade of red to these warming stripes last year. These problems are worrying, but for a long time I still thought of pollution and climate change and the biodiversity crisis as distant issues, ones that matter to plants and animals, not to humans, or to people in the future, not people today. And that's exactly what most of us still think. Around the world, most people are worried, but we don't think it's our problem. We still think it's someone else's. And that's what I used to think too until I started to learn some important things. Like what? Well, did you know that air pollution from burning coal and gas and oil is responsible for a third of all premature births around the world and 9 million deaths per year. Just for context, since the beginning of the COVID pandemic, an estimated 7 million people have died around the world, yet 9 million die from air pollution every year, and hardly anyone knows. And that's just the air pollution from fossil fuels. What about the heat-trapping gases with this extra blanket we're wrapping around the Earth? People often refer to climate change as global warming, but I prefer to call it something different. I call it global weirding. Why? Because wherever we live, the weather is getting weirder and it's putting us all at risk. We've always had heat waves, floods, droughts, and storms, but we've never experienced one so strong as the Southeast Asian heat wave this past April and May that decimated the durian crops, closed schools, put hundreds of millions at risk, or the heat wave in Mecca in June that killed over 1,000 pilgrims, or the floods in Brazil last May that displaced almost 1 million people, in Pakistan a few years ago that displaced 8 million people, or the floods in Bangladesh that put a third of the country underwater not once, but twice, or the record-breaking wildfires from coast to coast in my home country of Canada, or the stronger hurricanes and typhoons, like the one that shut down Shanghai last week and killed hundreds across Vietnam and Southeast Asia. Climate change affects us all, but it doesn't affect us all equally. Those who are already vulnerable, who don't have a safe place to live or enough food for their family or enough clean water to drink, those are the ones who are most vulnerable. Let me give you 2 examples. First, poor neighborhoods in rich cities where immigrants often live are much more likely to flood when it rains. And during a heat wave, they can be up to 7 degrees C warmer than wealthier neighborhoods. Why? Lack of green space, because the city has not invested in its poorest inhabitants. There's no place for the water to go when it rains, and no vegetation to shade their homes when it's hot. We also know that countries in Southeast Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa are much more greatly impacted by these weather extremes than Korea, France, or the United States. So take the example of Malawi. Nearly a decade ago, child marriage in Malawi was outlawed. This is a terrible practice, of course, of selling girls, some as young as 8 or 10, into marriage. For several years after the law was passed, child marriages declined, and then they started to tick back up. Why? Advocates spoke with the families and quickly learned the answer was clear. More frequent and more severe droughts, because of a warming world, were causing many families to make the unimaginable choice, when the crops fail, of the whole family starving or selling a daughter into marriage. Climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss, these are environmental issues, but they are not only environmental issues. They're issues of hunger and poverty, housing and health, and perhaps most of all, justice and equity, because climate change is not fair. For the nearly 1 billion who live in the low-elevation coastal zone and who depend on the ocean for their primary source of food and protein, how will they feed their families when the ocean food chain breaks down and sea level inundates their homes? What of the nearly 2 billion who already make their living from marginal lands? How will they feed their families? For me, this is not an issue of science. It's an issue of faith. In the Gospel of John, Jesus told his disciples that they would be recognized by their love for others. How can we claim to love others and not care about this? No, I'm convinced if we take the Bible seriously, that we will be at the front of those who are advocating for and demanding action on these issues for protecting the people and other living things most affected. So how should we respond to this? This is a question that will be discussed further by our next speaker, Ruth Padilla, as well as by you in your conversations here and your discussions at home. But let me offer you this thought as you begin to do so. There's nothing about pollution or biodiversity loss or climate change in the Bible per se, but the Bible has much to say about our attitudes that I believe is directly relevant to our response. What I've shared can invoke fear. In fact, most people around the world are afraid and worried about these issues, but they don't know what to do. And this doesn't have to be us. In 2 Timothy 1:7, the Apostle Paul tells us that God has not given us a spirit of fear. So if we are reacting out of fear, that is not from God. Instead, we have been given a spirit of power, which means we are empowered to act. We're not paralyzed. We have the God-given ability to act out of love, concern for others rather than ourselves, and with a sound mind, which I believe is informed in part by the science that we do studying this world that God has given us. So what does it look like to act with love and a sound mind? Often our mind jumps to what we can do personally, recycling, or for example. But if we don't change the system, individual action is never enough. And as a church, we understand the importance of acting in community and how this can amplify our impact. That's why the most vital thing we can do around the world is what most people are not doing, which is to simply have a conversation about why this matters and what we can do about it together. Talk about it, teach about it, discuss what to do. Of course, not all this talking is done verbally. When we take actions to invest in nature, like the church forests of Ethiopia, when we are good stewards of our resources through putting solar panels on the church or doing an energy audit, when we invest in our communities to make them more resilient to climate impacts, all of these actions speak just as loudly, if not more so, than our words. What else can we do? We can partner with many of the organizations here working on climate justice, because I believe this will make a difference. So let me end with 3 encouraging things our sound minds need to know from the science. First, 5 years ago, climate scientists around the world got together to write a report summarizing all the science of how what we're doing will affect us. And do you know what their conclusion was? Every action matters. That's an empowering message that I think fits well with what the apostle tells us in 2 Timothy. Second, scientists have identified key tipping points in our society that could rapidly catalyze change, and one of the strongest tipping points they identify is framing these issues I've talked about not as economic issues, not as environmental issues, but as moral issues. And who is better suited to do that than us? Lastly, and most importantly, a global poll recently asked people why they cared about this issue, and they found one reason that outweighed every other one everywhere in the world, and guess what that one reason was? Love. Love for each other and for the next generation is what motivates us to act. And that, to me, reminds me of Galatians 5, where it says the only thing that counts is when our faith expresses itself through love. So this is why I believe that what I've shared with you tonight is a reaffirmation of the deepest truth of the gospel. God's abiding, extravagant, overwhelming, and endless love that has been poured out in our hearts already to share with everyone around us so they too recognize that our God is a God who passionately loves every person and every part of his creation. Thank you.